Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Tillman. Now, today is more of a passion project for me. And the reason I'm gonna call this a passion project is because what I'm gonna talk about today is so near and dear to my heart. Now, as a police officer of about 7 years, one of the best assignments I had was a school resource officer. And during my time as a school resource officer, I got to impact the lives of so many students that came upon my school campus and other schools. But the reason this is a passion project is because right now the school resource officer position is under attack. And what do I mean by it being under attack? There are so many schools across the country right now that have already called to dismantle the police departments that are patrolling their schools. You have police departments in Minnesota. There's no longer going to be officers at the college campus. There's no longer going to be officers in the high schools. There's local police departments where I live where there's petitions going out right now to dismantle the SRO programs in those schools. There's police departments in Arizona right now that have already approved that they're going to get rid of the police departments that have SROs in their schools. Why is this so important to me? Well, I need you guys for 1 second to go with me beyond just the role of a school resource officer. What I need you to understand is that it goes beyond just the uniforms that these officers are wearing on the campuses. It goes beyond just the militarization of what people are proclaiming law enforcement to be. There's a few stories that come to mind as when I was a school resource officer. I'm gonna start with the first one. The first one, I had a kid walk into my office one time and tell me that on July 17th, he was gonna take his life. Well, you know what? When I heard those words, it made me upset because I realized that this kid was going through a crisis that was going on at home and in his personal life. And so what I did was I started a campaign called Erase the Date because it was my job to get him to erase that date so he didn't commit suicide. Well, you know what? The best part of the story is that kid didn't commit suicide. And not only that, me and him have a great relationship to this day. I love that kid. That wasn't because I was a police officer. That was because I was a big brother to that kid in that situation. I just happened to assume the role as a police officer at the school. Another story. I remember one summer I was working patrol, and when school was out of session, all the kids are at home. So as I was working patrol, I responded to an unknown trouble situation that happened around the corner from the school that I worked at. When I arrived on scene, I got there and I rolled over the subject that was on the ground, and I saw that it was one of my students who had been shot through and through the chest. So when I realized it was one of my students, not only did I recognize he was one of my students, but I had a great relationship with the student. The student that I still love to this day. And so I escorted him to the hospital as he's in the ambulance to make sure he got there. And one of the worst things about that day was when I got there, the nurse said, you know what? I don't know if he's gonna survive. He's lost a lot of blood. As soon as I arrived at the hospital, that kid's grandmother greeted me and she said, hey, are you Officer Tillman? I said, yeah, how'd you know that? She said, because my son or my grandson talks about you all the time, and I figured you're the one that he's talking about. Now, the best part of this whole story is that kid ended up surviving that night. And the next day when I called him at the hospital, I called to talk to his mom because I didn't know what the status of him was. He's like, hey, Officer Tillman, what's going on? But you realize that relationship that I had with him went well before that day that he got shot. One of the last stories that I'm gonna share with you guys today, which is just one of many stories that I have as a school resource officer, was when I got promoted, I had the opportunity to impact so many different lives at the school. However, when I got promoted, I had to go back to patrol. Now, many of you guys have already probably seen the video of when I danced at that school. Well, I wanted you guys to realize that it wasn't me just dancing at the school. I didn't do that to make a viral video. I did that because I had a relationship with every single one of my students at that school that led up to that day. And I said, hey, I got to go out with the bang, which is why I chose to do a choreographed dance with the dance team that was personable, that was from Ryan Tillman, not Officer Tillman, but from Ryan Tillman to the students of my school. Now, the reason I share these stories with you is because I want you to realize that the school resource officer position goes well beyond officers just in a school affecting arrests and trying to what we call classify students in the criminal justice system. It goes well beyond that. As a matter of fact, I could probably count on maybe 1 or 2 hands the amount of times that I actually took somebody to juvenile hall. I didn't do it much. Did enforcement come part of my position? Yes, but that wasn't my direct role there. My direct role was more as a mentor. My direct role was more as a big brother. My direct role was to be a resource to the staff at that school. I remember at the very end of the school year, we had a lot of fights going on at that school, and because safety was my priority on that campus, I devised a plan so that way we could reduce the fights, which it worked. And so a school resource officer's position is more so dedicated to the safety of your student. So that way, as a parent, when you send your student off to school, when you send your child off to school, you know he's going to be safe because you know that there's somebody that's going to be there to react to the threat as once it presents itself. The second thing is the mental health and the well-being of our kids. So that way we know when I send my son or daughter off to school, I know that they can go to somebody if they're feeling depressed, if they're feeling suicidal, and I can have the trust that that officer is going to get the job done so that way they feel better. Instead of talking about dismantling schools, what we need to talk about is putting the right officers into positions to be school resource officers. That's what it comes down to. There are some school resource officers that don't need to be school resource officers. They're angry at their job. They're angry at their profession. And so when they go to school, they're angry with the kids that they deal with. Those are the ones we need to get rid of, not the assignment in and of itself. So instead of talking about getting rid of school resource officers, what we need to do is we need to focus on finding the right people to be school resource officers in those spots. So I love you guys. I told you guys, this is a passion project for me because although I've been doing this job for 7 years, although I've got to do a lot of different things within the job as a police officer, school resource officer was one of the best because it was the most rewarding. I have so many relationships with these kids day in and day out that still carry over to the street that I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge on this recording today. So when you guys, if you're in your local cities, if you're in your local counties, whatever it may be, find out what the city's stance is on having school resource officers in those schools. And I beg you, if you're one of those people that wants to get rid of it, I beg you to humble yourself, rethink this, and say, you know what, let's find out a better ways so that way we can talk about having these officers here, just finding the right officers to be there. Thanks again, and God bless.